Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Walsh. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We've got a good one for you, as always. Let's take a look at what we're working with today. Big news from the White House. We will give you the latest and what you need to take away from this Biden big student debt forgiveness bill or proposal here. This reform, much more reform, though, is needed to attack cost bloat in American higher education, with the full breakdown over at the American Prospect from Ryan Cooper. Also, big news out of California. California will be banning the sale of new gasoline cars by 2035, which is going to have a big blue influence, not just on California, but other states as well. Also, some big leaked reporting. Douglas Emmett Incorporated, the CEO and president of Douglas Emmett Incorporated, is pro-recession. We'll explain why a little bit later on. And Starbucks just caught doing some illegal activity, according to the NLRB, illegally withholding wages and benefits from unionized baristas at its company. So that's some interesting stuff as Starbucks continues to face more and more pressure from people like Bernie Sanders all the way down to recognize the union and stop busting. All right, so we're starting at the top here today. And it's very, very much an interesting situation. It's something that, kind of had to happen. But it felt like it wasn't, honestly, for a really long time. Joe Biden, after promising to, I think it was forgive $50,000, but then got winnowed down to $10,000 of student debt per person under 100, or for people making under $125,000 per year. So he's going to cancel $10,000 for every student loan balance owned by the federal government, which is about 80% of the outstanding total, subject to an income cap of $125,000 for individuals and $250,000 for families. Pell Grant recipients will also going to be eligible for up to $20,000 in forgiveness. And the White House's fact sheet on it is pretty much a whole big. Those are pretty much the key big points. $20,000 for Pell Grants, and $125,000. And the cap on income is for the $10,000 is going for non-Pell Grant people is going to be $125,000 for individuals and $250,000 for families. This is definitely good news. It's something that you did not really expect to happen. It's something that. It's been in the works as a policy decision or a policy push for so long. It's one of those weird things. And you're so used to seeing Biden doing so little for so long on these key issues. And he did face a fair bit of pressure. There was a lot of, smart economists coming out there and saying all the bad, awful, horrible things this was going to do if you gave people just a little bit of the break on the debt. But, of course, there's a big problem being, and of course, the system is not fully resolved. We're not solving the problem that makes American higher education so expensive. As Matt Bruning points out on the People's Policy Project, canceling $10,000 zeroes out the balances of at least 31% of student loan borrowers, while cutting the balances of a further 21% by at least half. So that's a pretty big, like at least half of. At least more than half of the people who have student loan debt in this country will see their student loan balances be cut by at least half, if not more. So that is a pretty positive development, something that definitely the Democrats should run on in the midterms. And if you're looking at what they're doing here, it is a little bit it's surprising, a little bit weird to see them like taking these big policy steps with the IRA. I don't know how really too much of it is going to be felt by Americans at the midterms. But this is something that I think definitely, if they have the smart political machinery here, they are going to want to use and they're going to want to utilize, because this is something that, this is going to help a lot of people. But I could also see a lot the Democrats to a certain extent, getting washed on this and kind of the communications war, because you get people coming out. I thought we were responsible. I was responsible. I paid my dues. Well, if you have someone like Joe Biden, in the White House communications team, which has not always been up to the job on some pretty key issues, failing to come out, be on TV. Spread the message out, be in the kind of mainstream platforms, which, the mainstream media is losing a lot of influence, but what is said there does tend to trickle down to a lot of the populace. So, if they're not out there, if they're not at least trying to communicate on that front, I think it could be a problem. But yeah, this is people need to know, I think, the impact it's going to have. I mean, people will feel the impact it's going to have on a lot of people. So yeah, I mean, if you don't know someone, there's a big chance, especially if you're younger, there's a chance that somebody you know is going to be affected in a positive way by this bill or by this executive action, I believe it is. But it is, yeah, and these are likely to be younger people who are more likely to be, apathetic towards the Democrats heading into the midterms with, Biden's actions leading up when he was really in the hole. He's climbed out of it a little bit more through actions like these that are specifically targeted to those parts of the base that tend to be more and more apathetic during the midterms, especially when there's little action from the Democrats on policy issues. But yeah, I think this is going to have a very, very positive, or not a very positive effect, but it definitely can't hurt for Joe Biden. On the systematic level, there's a lot more stuff to go, but we will get into all of that. Let's delve a little bit more here into the prospect piece. So yeah, doubled relief for Pell Grant recipients. The White House estimates that 20 million out of the 43 million borrowers will have their full balance extinguished. Some borrowers, in turn, are more likely to have failed to graduate or have been ripped off by a for-profit scam college, and thus in the most need of help. A Penn Wharton analysis found that with $10,000 in forgiveness in the income cap, about 58% of the benefit would accrue to the bottom 60% of incomes. Another 20% would be in the fourth income quintile. And it also found that the income cap saves a piddling $15 billion. So it really didn't turn out to be all that much. This whole big income cap that they were supposed to do to look smart and means tested, and we're regulating ourselves here. So as Bruning points out, though, the Wharton model is based on the survey of consumer finances, which greatly understates the amount of student debt held by the poorest people. So that is that's of course the model that you're going to see everywhere on mainstream media about, they were also said this is going to cause inflation. This is going to be, a big this is a scare, this is the fear-mongering model that Penn Wharton has been working on that is going to be used by a lot, and it already has been used by a lot of mainstream media outlets to, fear-monger about this situation that, especially when we're talking about the benefit here, and you hear people talk about where the benefit goes, and they cite that study. Just keep in mind, again, that a lot of this is, they are underestimating the amount of student debt held by poor people. So the targeted income cap is going to help, and it's going to most likely send most of the benefit more to poor people than the Penn Wharton study would have you believe. Matt Bruning estimates that the bottom quintile should receive about 20% of the benefit, and the bottom 3/5 about 65%. The $20,000 for Pell Grant recipients, which wasn't reported until now and thus hasn't been analyzed yet, will make it even more progressive. That little test in that is a positive redistribution of wealth. Biden also announced new rules to punish institutions that load up graduates with loads of debt and new reporting mechanisms to steer prospective students away from them. As welcome as this news is, it does not do enough to fix the broader system of higher education financing. Much like the medical system, higher education is badly in need of price regulation. For decades now, the government has been shoveling subsidies into colleges and universities, with a few exceptions. They have not responded by jacking their prices. They have responded by jacking their prices through the roof because they know they'll always get that funding from colleges and universities. Even the private ones obviously get tons and tons of funding. Biden can't do this by himself, of course, but it's long since time for the government to start demanding a better deal for itself and American students. If you're really trying to be, serious about reforming the education system. So Kevin Carey recently wrote an excellent piece in Slate about the strategies colleges and universities use to wring the maximum number of pennies out of students and their families. They do this with price discrimination, tailoring an individual price for each person using demographic and surveillance data that matches up with what they're willing to pay as closely as possible. The eye-popping sticker price of $50,000 and up at most colleges today is fake. It's a sales gimmick to trick people into thinking they're getting a great deal with an imaginary financial aid package. So that's interesting. I didn't really know too much about that. It's like a lot of this stuff, if you really push, if you really negotiate, like they are willing to drop it a lot more. And then, when they do drop it, they're like, oh, aren't you so happy the break that we gave you with the financial aid package? It is certainly a very manipulative tactic. And the thing is, there is no federal oversight on any of this stuff. They just let them get away with it. There is these systems that are supposed to regulate this, that are supposed to, keep an eye on these massive institutions that we set up. We set this up. We could pay these people to do these things, have been completely eroded over the course of many, many decades. So one unfortunate consequence is that poor families often end up paying more than richer ones. Parents of means who have finished college are often sophisticated consumers of higher education and are able to drive a hard bargain. Carey writes, whereas lower income, less educated parents feel an enormous obligation to help their children move further up the socioeconomic ladder and blindly trust the colleges have their best financial interests at heart. One reason universities behave like this is the neoliberal ideology which saturated admission departments and made them behave like businesses instead of schools. But another is federal subsidies of student loans. As I have previously written, this is the author here, Ryan Cooper, in The American Prospect. The theory behind this practice was that graduates would make more money with their human capital, which they would use to pay off the loans, and make a tidy profit for the government in the process, which could be used towards the budget deficit. This did not happen. Wages remained stagnant, but higher ed, human capital, when we don't properly invest in it, it does not go very far, and you let, human capital is just such a crazy term. Wages remained stagnant. Higher prices kept going up and inflated a huge balloon of student debt. Millions ended up with preposterously large balances that they could not repay. This prompted Democrats to take several steps. So they nationalized almost all student debt as part of the Affordable Care Act. Second, the Obama administration cracked down on for-profit colleges, which were the worst offenders in the space. Third, Obama set up an income-driven repayment scheme in which borrowers could pay 10% of their income for a number of years and then have their loans forgiven. The IDR was a godsend to many borrowers, now about a third of them, but it meant an increasing portion of enrollees are making no progress in paying down their debt balance because the interest is just so high and it's so hard to declare bankruptcy on. It also means that Biden's cancellation will not affect people with the highest balances, since the $10,000 to $20,000 reduction will not reduce their payments below 10% of income, so they can't eventually get to that point where they can pay it to 10% and then get it forgiven. That said, Biden's proposed reform of the IDR to make it more generous, especially for undergrads, would help. According to the White House fact sheet, the new version of the IDR would ensure that this is the income. This is the income-driven repayment about the 10% income. You pay 10% of your income, and then eventually have your loans forgiven. So that reform of the IDR for undergrads would help. According to the White House fact sheet, the new version of the IDR would ensure that those enrolled pay no more than 5% of their total income in monthly debt payments, which is going to be obviously half reduction from 10% to 5% of your income. So they also increased the amount of income exempt from that calculation. Nobody earning less than 225% of the federal poverty level would have to make a monthly payment at all. No interest would capitalize under the IDR. As long as borrowers make their required payment, their loan balance will not grow, and balances under $12,000 will be forgiven after 10 years instead of 20. So it's easier and less burdensome with this reform to kind of bring yourself down. One option would be attaching, more stiff regulations here to federally subsidized student loans to kind of crack down on some of this kind of super high cost price gouging situation here where they can really just drive or really just squeeze some of these, especially lower income families. One option would be attaching even more stiff regulations to federally subsidized student loans, simply requiring institutions to cut down on fancy amenities, administrative bloat, and so forth. The administration has announced that the Department of Education would hold accountable colleges that have contributed to the student debt crisis, but that consists of an annual watch list of college programs with high debt levels and strongly worded letters. The Biden method, a strongly worded letter telling pretty much the same thing he did with the gas companies, same thing Pete Buttigieg did with the airline companies, pretty much getting them all in a room and saying, hey guys, we got to be better. Let's work on this, all right? And they're just pretty much doing nothing. A better option could be simply nationalizing financing directly. It's a remarkable fact the federal government already spends about 15% more on all its various indirect higher education subsidies than the sum total of all tuition at public colleges and universities. The money is already there. We're spending 15% more than it would cost to do that in the first place. If tuition spending were directly on the budget instead of hidden in various loan subsidies and guarantees, it would amount to price controls for public higher ed. Uncle Sam would not want to be paying for exercise palaces or other such nonsense. Lower income students could get a degree without laboring for a decade under a credit ruining debt burden. And upper middle class graduates would feel an obligation to repay society for financing their education. What's not to like? That would definitely be interesting in terms of the payment, the payment form, or how about just making public colleges tuition free in the long term? That would be a big deal. But first of all, this is going to have an impact. It's going to have probably, I would say, about as big an impact on people's lives as a Biden policy could bring, with the structural and political limitations that are on Biden's administration. So that is definitely something to keep an eye out for. And I think, if this political effect is definitely going to get some people, I would say, who maybe would have felt like Biden isn't doing a lot for them, like the administration's kind of been inactive in the past 2 years, not really feeling that excited to go out and vote. Maybe saying, so stay at home next year to go to the midterms. Biden just, my student loan payments, which have been a pain in my ass for years, finally just got smaller. Hey, why don't I give Biden a chance? Why don't I go check things out? That certainly is a situation I could see happening. So very interesting stuff all around. We'll continue to follow this story and a lot more coming on it, we expect, over the next few days. Newsflash. My name is Spencer Walsh. This is the Spencer Walsh Radio Network, and if you're listening to one of our podcasts, whether it's Newsflash, Hidden History, The Spencer Walsh Show, or something else, ladies and gentlemen, we have one simple request of you. Please be sure to rate us, subscribe to us if you like us, and leave us a comment, because just like all of you, sometimes we need that feedback in our lives, good or bad. We want to hear what you have to say. So please do those steps. Make SWR and content better. And thank you so much for listening. Yeah, I mean, it does kind of seem a little bit remarkable here as we welcome you back to this live newsflash. Like, there is a pretty, people are actually pissed about the student loan debt plan here. This some kind of mainstream, Huffington Post, or no, a Politico reporter here, he's kind of hand-wringing about this, quote tweeting some people. There's a bit of kind of mainstream concern about, this may not be quite appropriate. The executive branch doesn't. No, we've been over this time and time again. They've done it for sectors of people. Trump's done it for sectors of people. Obama's done it for sectors of people. Biden has the right from the executive branch to cancel student debt. It has been pretty much, basically decided. So, the OLC memo on Biden's order canceling student debt is weak. The rationale is COVID emergency, but it does not mention Robert's court ruling against eviction moratorium and vaccine mandate. I don't see this order surviving a legal challenge. This is pretty much federal society people kind of hand-wringing over this. Orrin Kerr, conservative legal thinker, I guess you could call him. The power of the Secretary of Education is not my area, to put it lightly, and I have no view on the policy in question. But when I read the OLC's position, I can imagine a federal court disagreeing with it more readily than I can imagine a federal court agreeing with it. And it's like these are like this is the stuff that we're going to see kind of put out all over the mainstream media over the next few days about, this may not be legally appropriate. But again, you got to keep this stuff in mind. The executive branch has unilaterally waived student loans multiple times over multiple administrations and just did so last week for ITT students. The HEROES Act stuff is not their only or even main legal basis for doing this. The fact that they have Biden is the executive leader of the executive branch, has control over this debt, which is going out through the Department of Education. Like, this has been done many, many times before. If this, honestly, I think if they drop the ball on this legally, it is Joe Biden's fault, because this is something that they should be able to go through quite successfully. It is. Yeah, giving taxpayers standing to sue to force an unwilling federal government to collect debt from someone else would make things interesting, to say the least. All right, let's move on to our next story. Big one out of California. California regulators on Thursday will vote to put in place a sweeping plan to restrict and ultimately ban the sale of gasoline-powered cars, state officials said, and who the state governors described as the beginning of the end of the internal combustion engine. Big deal. The new policy detailed Wednesday in a morning news conference is widely expected to accelerate the global transition toward electric vehicles. Not only is California the largest auto market in the United States, but more than a dozen other states typically follow California's lead when setting their own auto emissions standards because of just how tied together their markets are. If the states follow through, and most are expected to adopt similar rules, the restrictions would apply to about 1/3 of the United States auto market. So really big deal. This is reporting here in the New York Times. Really huge. So Margot Og, a electric, or Og, I don't know how to say that, electric vehicles expert who headed the EPA's transportation emissions program under Clinton, Bush, and Obama. As additional states put in place their own versions of these policies, they will drive the market and drive innovation, she said. The rule issued by the California Air Resource Board will require that all new cars sold in the state of 2035 be free of greenhouse gas emissions like carbon dioxide. The rule sets interim targets that require 35% of new passenger vehicles sold by 2026 to produce zero emissions, and then 68% by 2030. So 2035, they're trying to get all gas, or the selling of all gas cars will be, off the road. Or there will be no new gas. They're not going to be off the road, but you know what I mean. Struggling to talk tonight for whatever reason. I do apologize. But transportation is the nation's top source of planet warming greenhouse gas emissions. Cutting down that car fuel is going to be a big deal. And 2035, with the pace, the amount of electric cars that are going on the road, the Hummer, for God's sakes, is EV now. So I think that is going to be a big step in the right direction. Let's move on now to our next story. We're hearing a little bit of this, a pretty disturbing amount of this, actually. Various executives, various people who are in positions of high business power seem to be very, very happy about a possible oncoming recession. This is Ken Klippenstein and John Schwartz in The Intercept. The CEO and president of Douglas Emmett Incorporated, a real estate corporation worth over $3 billion and based in Santa Monica, said on an August 2 second corporate earnings call that if a recession comes, it will be good for the commercial real estate business if it comes with a level of unemployment that puts employers back in the driver's seat and allows them to get all their employees back to the office. Because, these commercial real estate guys, they have been absolutely screwed by the pandemic, especially with certain areas like at California. You get more wealthier people. They're not coming to work anymore. They're moving out. They're spreading out. They're progress past the need for office space, and of course all the economic moving and shaking that kind of comes with it. So that is a very remarkable thing, and something that there's going to be a lot of economic power put into trying to preserve, trying to preserve the life of commercial real estate, because got tons of small businesses. You got Chamber of Commerce, Army, trying to get people back to the office just so they can go down, pop down to the shops, out of their office and go spend some money, your local small business, whatever the case may be. So this executive here, Jordan Kaplan, then repeated that the thought that would be that unemployment would be up and therefore employers would be in the driver's seat to bring people back to the office, which is right where they want them. So unemployment up, people looking for jobs, desperate, they'll be like, hey, now you got to come back to the office. Sorry, bud. Just how it is. Rather than that, I would not be pleased to have us go into a recession. Oh, wow. So that's... so he's saying if my tenants are feeling the impact of recession, I can't imagine how I think that's good. So he just kind of, put it in there with a caveat. But, it's very rare that you see everyone just say people straight out admitting like, hey, this recession is good. But, it would be good for them because that is we're seeing these people literally come out and, not explicitly tell you because a lot of the stuff is just kind of being leaked or, not really being reported on or really picked up on by, national press. But I think it is very, very, because like this stuff is they're saying it, what they want to happen, why they want to happen, and the clear policy prescriptions to make it happen. And the scary thing is we're kind of starting to see some of those same policy steps, like the interest rates starting to creep up. We are starting to see that happen, and it is for the kind of purpose of creating those same dynamics that we saw in the 80s with the stagflation that really broke any kind of labor power, and completely made up or in this case, I think it would be making up the situation of kind of wage price spiral rather than a price wage spiral to combat inflation and just anything that would just force people, just really whatever excuse they need to drive unemployment up. And people back in the office and workers having less power, that is the excuse that they will take in any given moment. It's really pretty much as simple as it is. Kaplan made the groups in response to a question from Citigroup analyst Michael Griffin, who said, we've seen some of your office peers come out and say that potentially that a recession could be good for the office space. Curious to get your thoughts on what we could expect from an impact on the portfolio, just given the central recessionary environment on the horizon. Such a financial question there. Stuart McElhenney, Vice President of Investor Relations for Douglas Emmett, told The Intercept that Kaplan was merely entertaining Griffin's argument, which he said was a common one on Wall Street, and that Kaplan was actually skeptical of it. I think overwhelmingly the feeling is that a recession would not be good for business or for any of our customers. But it would your customers, even if they were making, maybe less profits, they at least would be leasing from you. Like that is something that would be a little bit of a contrary there. There's still so many more job openings than people willing to fill those jobs. So there is a sense that these employers have been very unwilling to make these unpopular moves, like making people come into work. The dynamic was also discussed on, so just that dynamic. The employers are not able to make the employees make moves, make decisions that they don't want to make. They're not in the driver's seat, just like that guy was saying. And, whatever Jordan, whatever the guy's name is, thinks or not, like that's not the biggest deal. But the biggest deal is what is Jerome Powell thinking, because that is going to have obviously ripples up and down the market. I think he's speaking tomorrow. Which should be pretty interesting, to say the least. But the dynamic was discussed on a May earnings call for Equity Commonwealth, a company with commercial real estate holdings comparable to those of Douglas Emmett. Equity Commonwealth's chief operating officer told analysts that it had seen some false starts in our portfolio where tenants have called their employees back to the office, indicated they'll need some space, but then all right, we move on with the next story in the final story in our show today. So Starbucks has been in a bit of trouble. They illegally withheld raises from union workers, according to the National Labor Relations Board, on wages and benefits, according to a complaint from Wednesday. So the complaint arrives during a campaign by the coffee chain and its interim CEO, Howard Schultz, to tamp down unionization efforts at its stores around the United States. 230 locations so far have voted to join Starbucks Workers United. We've been clear in that we are following the NLRB rules when it comes to unilaterally giving benefits, says Reggie Borges, a Starbucks spokesperson, in an email. So they're seeking back payment for benefits for unionized workers since May, and to require Schultz to read a statement to workers about their union rights, which I'm sure is something he'd absolutely love to do. So, that is definitely a very interesting dynamic there, as we could really continue to see Starbucks just really fight and lose a war, an absolute war against these unions. They're trying to close stores. They're pulling out every single dirty trick in the book, but these stores are just coming in apace, and just they haven't really been able to kind of stem the tide with anything major yet. So that's definitely a big story to watch. What will they do? Will they have actual power to influence Starbucks working conditions, and will other stores follow? We're looking at Amazon, some interesting drives happening in various spots all over the country there, which is going to be very, very interesting as well. Interesting time for labor. Interesting time to be tuned into Newsflash. We'll be back tomorrow with more. Thank you so much for listening. Really appreciate it.